Ivan Milat was born Ivan Robert Marco Milat on December 27, 1944, in Guildford, New South Wales, Australia. He was the fifth of 14 children in a large Croatian-Australian family. The Milat household was tumultuous and strict, with a tough upbringing that shaped Ivan's early years. Milat's father, Stephen Milat, was a Croatian immigrant and a demanding figure known for his harsh discipline. His mother, Margaret Milat, managed the large household. The family lived in relative isolation, moving frequently and settling in areas around Sydney. The children were largely left to their own devices, developing a reputation for unruly behaviour in the local communities. From a young age, Ivan Milat exhibited antisocial and psychopathic behaviour, such as attacking animals with machetes, which led to his placement in a residential school at age 13. By 17, he was in juvenile detention for theft, and by 19, he was involved in a shop break-in. In 1964, Milat received an 18-month sentence for breaking and entering. A month after his release, he was arrested for driving a stolen car and sentenced to 2 years hard labour. In September 1967, at 22 years old, he was sentenced to 3 years imprisonment for theft. April 7, 1971, Ivan Milat prowled near the Liverpool railway station, his eyes scanning for vulnerable prey. His chance came when he spotted 2 18-year-old female hitchhikers, their youthful optimism a stark contrast to the dark intentions swirling in his mind. Brandishing a knife, he forced the terrified girls into his vehicle, the glint of the blade silencing any thoughts of resistance. The journey turned into a nightmare as Milat's sinister plans unfolded. He assaulted one of the hitchhikers, his brutality leaving deep emotional scars. Desperation fueled their every move, and when the car finally stopped at a petrol station cafe, they seized a fleeting moment of opportunity. Their escape was frantic, hearts pounding with fear and adrenaline, as they alerted authorities to the horror they had endured. Milat was swiftly arrested later that day, charged with 1 count and 2 counts of armed robbery. But even as he awaited trial, his criminal activities did not cease. Alongside some of his brothers, he embarked on a string of audacious robberies, a defiant middle finger to the law. When the net tightened, Milat executed a daring ploy to evade capture, faking his own suicide by leaving his shoes at the Gap, a notorious Sydney suicide spot. Authorities were left baffled as Milat vanished, suspected of fleeing to Queensland and Victoria before slipping across the Tasman Sea to New Zealand. For 2 years, he lived a ghost-like existence, but whispers suggested he had secretly returned to Australia, using a fake passport to live under the radar. His ability to elude capture showcased a cunning that was as dangerous as it was frustrating for law enforcement. In 1974, a personal tragedy brought him back into the spotlight. His mother suffered a heart attack, and as she lay in the hospital, Milat was rearrested. Yet, the charges of robbery and kidnapping against him crumbled in court, thanks to the skilled defense mounted by the Milat family's lawyer, John Marsden. The legal Houdini Act allowed Milat to slip back into society. By 1975, he had taken a job as a truck driver, working intermittently for the Roads and Traffic Authority. His mundane job masked the predator within, a facade that held for nearly 2 decades. But the shadows of his past were never far behind. The disappearance of several backpackers travelling through Australia. Among the first reported missing were Deborah Everest and James Gibson, both 19, who vanished after leaving Sydney for Confest near Albury on December 30, 1989. Another case involved 21-year-old German tourist Simone Schmeidel, last seen leaving Sydney for Melbourne on January 20, 1991. Similarly, a German couple, Gabor Neugebauer, 21, and Anja Habschied, 20, disappeared after leaving a King's Cross hostel for Mildura on December 26, 1991. British backpackers Caroline Clark, 21, and Joanne Walters, 22, were last seen in King's Cross on April 18, 1992. The first alarming discovery was made in September 1992, when two runners found a partially buried corpse while orienteering in the Belanglo State Forest, southwest of Sydney. The following morning, police discovered a second body 30 metres from the first. Dental records identified the bodies as those of Clark and Walters. Walters had suffered 15 stab wounds, while Clark had been shot 10 times, likely used for target practice. Investigators faced a daunting task. The isolation and size of the forest made it difficult to locate evidence and ascertain the extent of the crimes. However, the discovery of the bodies prompted police to search the area thoroughly. By October 5, 1993, a local man found bones while searching for firewood in a remote section of Belanglo. Police quickly identified the bodies as those of Gibson and Everest. Gibson's skeleton, found in a fetal position, showed 8 stab wounds, including a severed spine. Everest had been savagely beaten, with multiple skull fractures and a broken jaw. Investigators were puzzled, as Gibson's camera and backpack had previously been found far north in Galston Gorge. On November 1, 1993, a police sweep uncovered another skeleton in Belanglo, identified as Schmidl. She had at least 8 stab wounds, with some severing her spine. Clothing found at the scene matched those of another missing backpacker, Anya Habshid. Just days later, on November 4th, the bodies of Habshid and Neugebauer were found in shallow graves nearby. Habshid had been decapitated, and her skull was never found. Neugebauer had been shot in the head 6 times. The grisly nature of the murders and the pattern of violence suggested that a serial killer was at work. Evidence showed that some victims had been brutalized, prompting the establishment of Task Force Air on October 14, 1993. The New South Wales government offered a $500,000 reward for information. With an overwhelming volume of data, investigators used advanced link analysis technology to narrow down a suspect list from 230 to 32 individuals. This method involved analysing connections between suspects and the victims, including geographical locations and behavioural patterns. Speculation arose about the possibility of multiple killers due to the varied methods of murder and separate burials. On November 13th, police received a crucial tip from Paul Onions in the UK. On January 25, 1990, Onions had been backpacking in Australia when he accepted a ride from a man known as Bill. South of Mittagong, near Belanglo, Bill pulled out a revolver and rope to rob Onions, who managed to escape and report the incident to the Booral police. This lead was corroborated by Joanne Berry, a motorist who helped Onions, and the girlfriend of a man who worked with Milat. On February 26, 1994, police began surveillance on Ivan Milat's house. Milat, a road worker with a history of violence and a fascination with weapons, quickly became the prime suspect. His peculiar behaviour and the fact that he had given rides to hitchhikers in the areas where the victims were last seen made him a person of intense interest. Milat was arrested on May 22, 1994, after police executed a search warrant at his home. The search yielded a treasure trove of incriminating evidence, including items belonging to the victims, such as sleeping bags, cameras, and clothing. Additionally, firearms matching the type used in the murders were found, further linking Milat to the crimes. Homes of Milat's family members were also searched, uncovering more victim belongings. Milat was charged with 7 counts of murder on May 31, 1994. His trial began on March 26, 1996, in the Supreme Court of New South Wales. Despite overwhelming evidence, Milat claimed innocence, arguing that the prosecution needed to prove his guilt. His defence attempted to shift blame onto other family members. The trial lasted several weeks, during which the jury heard harrowing details about the murders and the suffering of the victims. The prosecution's case was bolstered by forensic evidence and the testimony of a key witness, Paul Onions, a British backpacker who had escaped an attack by Mila in 1990. Onions' testimony was pivotal in linking Mila to the crimes and showcasing his modus operandi. Ultimately, the jury found Milat guilty on July 27, 1996, of 7 counts of murder. He was sentenced to 7 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. The conviction brought some closure to the families of the victims, though the horror of the crimes left a lasting scar on the community and the nation. Milat faced a tough time in prison. On his first day at Maitland Jail, he was beaten by another inmate. He attempted to escape with convicted drug dealer George Savas in 1997, but the plan failed, and Savas was found hanged the next day. In 2001, he was transferred to a high-security unit at Goulburn Correctional Centre, and a public outcry followed when he received a toaster and television in his cell. In 2009, Milat severed his little finger with a plastic knife, intending to mail it to the High Court to force an appeal. He had previously harmed himself by swallowing razor blades and metal objects. In 2011, he went on a 9-day hunger strike to get a PlayStation, losing 25 kilograms in the process. In May 2019, Milat was diagnosed with terminal esophageal cancer and transferred to the Prince of Wales Hospital. Despite intensive treatment, his condition worsened, and he was moved to the Long Bay Correctional Centre. Milat died from esophageal and stomach cancer on October 27, 2019, at the age of 74. Despite numerous attempts by police to elicit a confession, he never admitted to his crimes. His body was cremated, and the costs were deducted from his prison account. Despite the end of his appeals and the ongoing speculation about additional victims, Milat remained unrepentant and steadfastly maintained his innocence until his death in 2019. His lack of remorse and refusal to cooperate with authorities left many questions unanswered and numerous families without closure. Investigators believe Milat could have been involved in more murders than the 7 for which he was convicted. Task Force Air compared Milat's profile to other cold cases, and experts suggest he likely killed before 1989. His brother Richard once opined there were heaps more bodies out there. Several unsolved cases were investigated for potential links to Milat. Karen Rowland, an expectant mother, went missing in 1971. Her body was found in Canberra, and Milat allegedly boasted about the murder. Peter Letcher, 18, was found handcuffed and shot near Jenolan Caves in 1988. Diane Panacchio, 29, disappeared in 1991. Her body was found in Talaganda State Forest, with stab wounds consistent with Milat's modus operandi. Other cases, including the disappearances of young women in the Hunter region in the late 1970s and early 1980s, were also investigated, but remain unsolved. Despite Milat's death, the full extent of his crimes may never be known. Harold Frederick Shipman, born on January 14, 1946, in Nottingham, England, came to be known by the infamous nickname Dr. Death. He worked as a general practitioner, a career that would later be overshadowed by his notorious actions. Harold's early life began in humble surroundings, growing up in a council estate with his working-class, religious parents. His father supported the family as a lorry driver, while his mother stayed home as a homemaker. Despite the modest circumstances, Harold's mother was known to be very controlling. Among her 3 children, Harold, the middle child, was her favourite. He was an intelligent young boy who managed to attend High Pavement Grammar School for his 6th form education. His academic prowess set him apart, and he became the first in his family to attend university. By the age of 17, Harold's mother had passed away, Their close bond made her death profoundly impactful on him. He witnessed her suffering from lung cancer, with a doctor administering morphine at home to ease her pain. This experience likely influenced Harold's future. In September 1965, he enrolled at Leeds University Medical School, marking the beginning of his journey into the medical profession. On his way to medical school, Harold met a woman called Primrose, whom he later married. After graduating in 1970, Harold gained employment as a GP in Todmorden, near the West Yorkshire border with Rochdale. However, in 1974, he was dismissed after being found slumped in his car with a prescription drug he should not have had. He was prosecuted for possessing pethidine, a synthetic opioid commonly given to women in labour. This was the first sign of Harold abusing his power as a medical professional. Harold's killing spree began in the mid-1970s, but it wasn't until the 1990s that his murders became more frequent and noticeable. He primarily targeted elderly women, often those living alone, which allowed him to operate with minimal suspicion. Harold administered lethal doses of diamorphine, a medical-grade heroin, to his victims, which he then covered up as natural causes or sudden heart failures. One of his early known victims was 73-year-old Hilda West, who died on March 5, 1975. Over the next 2 decades, Shipman's list of victims grew. Each death followed a similar pattern: sudden, unexpected, and under Shipman's sole care. He often encouraged cremation, which destroyed potential evidence. Shipman's method of operation was alarmingly consistent, showcasing a methodical and calculated approach to murder. He maintained meticulous control over his practice, which allowed him to target his victims with precision. His typical modus operandi involved visiting his patients in their homes under the pretense of routine checkups or to administer supposed pain relief. Shipman would inject his patients with a fatal dose of diamorphine, exploiting his medical knowledge to ensure the dosage was lethal. This drug, a powerful opioid, was commonly used in palliative care, making it less suspicious when found in medical contexts. After administering the drug, Shipman would often stay until the victim died, ensuring that the cause of death appeared natural. He would then falsify medical records to support the supposed natural cause of death, usually citing heart attacks or old age-related conditions. By completing the death certificates himself, Shipman avoided scrutiny and maintained a veneer of legitimacy. His role as a trusted family doctor meant that his suggestions were rarely questioned, allowing him to cover his tracks effectively. Irene Turner, another victim, died on July 9, 1996. Her death followed the same pattern, with Shipman injecting her with a lethal dose and documenting her death as due to natural causes. Her family, trusting Shipman, did not question the circumstances. A particularly notable case was that of Kathleen Grundy, a former mayor of Hyde. Grundy, who was found dead on June 24, 1998, became a pivotal figure in Shipman's downfall. Shipman had not only murdered her, but also forged her will to inherit a significant portion of her estate. This blatant greed led to intense scrutiny and ultimately uncovered his series of crimes. Her daughter's suspicion and the subsequent discovery of forged documents brought Shipman's crimes to light. The exhumation and toxicology report revealing lethal levels of diamorphine were crucial in exposing his murderous activities. Suspicion first began to mount in the early 1990s, when local undertakers noticed a higher-than-average number of cremation forms signed by Shipman. They observed a pattern. Most of the deceased were elderly women who had died suddenly and unexpectedly, often shortly after Shipman had visited them. Relatives of the deceased also began expressing concerns. In 1998, Dr. Linda Reynolds of the Brook Surgery in Hyde alerted the local coroner, John Pollard, about the high death rates among Shipman's patients. The matter was initially investigated but yielded no concrete evidence, allowing Shipman to continue his killing spree. Investigators began to identify a disturbing pattern. Many of Shipman's patients had died in similar circumstances. They were often found sitting fully dressed or in unusual locations within their homes, and Shipman had been the last person to see them alive. Additionally, a significant number of these patients had medical records that Shipman had altered posthumously to suggest they were terminally ill or had requested no resuscitation, which justified the use of diamorphine. The police examined Shipman's prescription records and discovered that he had been ordering large quantities of diamorphine, far more than necessary for his medical practice. They also found that he had been stockpiling the drug, diverting it for his own purposes. Investigators interviewed families of deceased patients, many of whom had initially accepted Shipman's explanations, but began to question the circumstances of their loved ones' deaths as the investigation unfolded. An unexpected ally in the investigation was Shipman's computer. It was found that Shipman had been altering medical records on his computer after the deaths of his patients. This digital tampering was crucial in establishing a timeline and proving that Shipman had premeditated the murders and attempted to cover them up by falsifying records. In September 1998, he was arrested and charged with 15 counts of murder and 1 count of forgery related to Kathleen Grundy's will. The trial began in October 1999 at Preston Crown Court. The prosecution presented compelling evidence, including the exhumation results, testimony from pharmacists, digital evidence of record tampering, and patterns of Shipman's behavior. On January 31, 2000, Shipman was found guilty on all charges and sentenced to life imprisonment with a recommendation that he never be released. The exposure of Shipman's crimes had far-reaching consequences. It led to a major public inquiry chaired by Dame Janet Smith, resulting in the Shipman Inquiry Reports. These reports highlighted significant failures in the medical regulatory systems and recommended extensive reforms to prevent such abuses in the future. Changes included better monitoring of doctors, stricter prescription controls, improved death certification processes, and the establishment of the National Clinical Assessment Authority to oversee medical professionals' conduct. Dr. Harold Shipman's case is a grim reminder of the potential for abuse within positions of trust. His actions resulted in the loss of countless lives and prompted significant changes in medical practices and regulations to restore and maintain trust in the healthcare system. The lessons learned from Shipman's crimes emphasize the importance of vigilance, accountability, and unwavering commitment to patient welfare in the medical profession. Few criminals capture public attention like Raoul Thomas Moat. Born on June 17, 1973, in Newcastle upon Tyne and Wear, his life was marked by tragedy and violence. His actions in the summer of 2010 left a lasting impact on communities and law enforcement. Moat's upbringing offers a glimpse into the turbulent forces that shaped his trajectory. Raised in the working-class environs of Newcastle, Moat experienced adversity from an early age. His mother, reportedly afflicted with bipolar disorder, grappled with mental health challenges that often led to her institutionalization. As a result, Moat and his half-brother Angus found themselves under the care of their grandmother, navigating a childhood marked by instability and emotional turmoil. This tumultuous backdrop undoubtedly left an indelible imprint on Moat's psyche, setting the stage for the complexities that would unfold in his later years. Despite the adversity he faced, Moat exhibited resilience and ambition in his youth. He pursued a variety of vocations, including work as a panel beater, bouncer, and tree surgeon, demonstrating a versatility that belied the challenges of his upbringing. Yet, beneath this veneer of adaptability lay a simmering discontent, fueled by perceived injustices and a growing sense of alienation from society. Moat's rampage began shortly after his release from Durham Prison on July 1, 2010, where he had served a short sentence for assault. Fueled by the belief that Stobart, his ex-girlfriend, had started a relationship with a police officer, Moat's actions escalated dramatically. On July 3, 2010, Moat shot and seriously injured Stobart and killed her new partner, Chris Brown, outside her home in Birtley, Gateshead. The next day, he declared war on Northumbria Police, blaming them for his life's misfortunes. This declaration was followed by the shooting of PC David Rathband, who was sitting in his patrol car on a roundabout in East Denton, Newcastle. Rathband survived, but was left permanently blinded by the attack. The attacks triggered one of the largest manhunts in British history. Over 160 armed officers, supported by helicopters and search dogs, scoured the countryside. Moat managed to elude capture for days, hiding in rural areas and living off the land. During this time, Moat remained in contact with police and media, sending letters and making phone calls. His communications revealed a deeply troubled individual, fixated on perceived betrayals and injustices. The public and media were captivated by the unfolding drama, which played out in real time across news broadcasts and social media. The manhunt culminated in a tense standoff on July 9, 2010, in the village of Rothbury, Northumberland. Cornered by police, Moat held a shotgun to his head and negotiated with officers for several hours. Despite efforts to resolve the situation peacefully, Moat ultimately shot himself in the early hours of July 10th, bringing the week-long ordeal to a tragic end. The aftermath of Moat's actions was devastating. Samantha Stobart survived her injuries, but was deeply traumatized, and Chris Brown's family was left to mourn their loss. PC David Rathband, despite his resilience, struggled with his injuries and the psychological toll, ultimately taking his own life in 2012. Moat's rampage had a profound impact on the victims, their families, and the broader community. The case raised serious questions about the handling of individuals with known violent tendencies, especially those recently released from prison.